and welcome to Dominant, your show here on Heart and Hand that chronicles the Souness and Smith era throughout the 80s and 90s at Rangers. I'm Martyn Ramsey, your host. I would hope you know by now. If you're new, first of all, where have you been? Second of all, welcome. We are at part 2 of our 4-part look at 91-92. Alchemy, I've called it. We'll get to that alchemy soon enough because as we left last week with David and Alan, Walter Smith in his first full season in charge, his new goalkeeper Andy Goram are finding life difficult at Rangers, and for the first half of this show anyway, things are not going to get any better. In fact, they're going to get worse before the corner is turned. Joining me to reassess this period of 1991 is all the way from Greece, Mr. John Cowden. How are you, John?
Very well, thank you. We need a new goalie. Get rid of this one.
Yes, not the only person to be shouting that, I'm sure, around September, October 1991. And Andy McGowan's here as well. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening. Good evening, John. Good evening, listeners.
Hi, Andy.
Okay, we've got all the pleasantries out of the way. Let's get down to business. These shows are never purely chronological, and this game happened then, that game happened, here was the attendance, here was the subs. But we will cover everything we need to cover. Let's start with Europe. As we know, the last 2 seasons, Rangers have been knocked out early, but they've been knocked out by very, very good teams. Red Star Belgrade would win the European Cup the season before. Bayern Munich the season before that would only be knocked out in semi-final extra time against possibly the greatest club side there's ever been. So, 2 quality sides. When the draw was made, this is a new look European Cup with a group stage. Rangers' idea, of course, Campbell Ogilvy's idea. And this is a trial run before it gets marketed and sold as something different the next year as the Champions League. Sparta Prague are not Red Star Belgrade. They are certainly not Bayern Munich. Andy, can you remember the feeling when we got that draw? Because there's been some real difficult ones over the last while. Looking back at the kind of contemporaneous opinion pieces, it was tricky, but we should be all right. And we were starting to think about avoiding the likes of Marseille and Barcelona in order to get to that group stage.
Aye, there was a mixture of ignorance and overinflated ego on your part, in that when we were drawing with Sparta Prague, I think the way you've described it would have been really accurate. It was neither a death sentence nor something we should be afraid of, and I think there's a full expectation that we would be going through. There's a kind of stereotypical caveat of Eastern European teams, and they're always tricky and they're technically good and they wear Adidas socks and stuff like that. So I think there was an expectation to go through. That's the bottom line. And with our players, I mean, we'd signed players with this in mind, and Mikhailichenko and so forth were signed for the European stage. It was no longer a case of everything was domestic. We were looking to move on. So it was a favourable draw. We should be going through here.
John, your finger on the pulse of European football was never better exemplified by your joy at drawing Red Star Belgrade the year before. That's who you wanted of all the teams in that second round. Were you more wary of Sparta Prague, or did you think, right, finally, this is all right, we can get through and kind of get on here?
Pretty confident before. I actually went to the first leg over there, and we were atrocious, and they weren't much better. So coming away from that, absolutely thought we're going to do this pub team. As indeed, I thought about most Czech teams we've played through the years, and usually we end up falling flat in our face against Czech pub teams. But this was a team that was very, very beatable. We were dreadful in the first leg, and yet we're still in it. I don't think we're much better in the second leg, to be honest, but got ourselves in the winning position. They weren't good. I know they did pretty decently. I have no idea how they did it, because they weren't at a level of, I don't think anybody who'd played in the preceding 5 years. If you never mind Red Star Bayern, I mean, Borussia Mönchengladbach, Bucharest, I think they were one of the worst teams we played around this time. In my opinion. I mean, there was nothing there that would say you're not going to go on relatively comfortably. So, yeah, but Czech teams, we're never that good against them for some reason.
I mean, we avoided some big hitters. Barcelona there, Marseille, who are very much the up-and-coming team, lost on penalties, of course, in the previous season to Red Star Belgrade. We avoided them. They had Portadown and they hammered them without any sympathy. Sampdoria, we missed Dynamo Kiev, old friends there. Arsenal, back in the European Cup, or an English team back in the European Cup for the first time since Heysel. So, yeah, spirits were high, and I guess with the memory of Kiev, really, with that 1-0 defeat, no big drama, we'll turn this around. Still not quite understanding the importance of away goals, which would continue pretty much throughout the duration of this show, it would appear. John, you're absolutely correct. It's not a great game. Andy Goram is under pressure. He makes 2 very good saves in that game. But as is the way of these things, no one remembers the good things that he was doing because his blunders were ringing so loudly everywhere. Because he's really at fault for that Sparta Prague goal. It's a big kind of looping winner from Jiri Nemec. And, you know, we're 1 down. Your memories of travelling home, the reason I mentioned that Kiev game, because it was surpassable, you know. Rangers overcame that deficit, so it's not like the Bucharest game, which kind of got away from us, and that second goal really made that complexion change very markedly. This is doable, but this goalkeeper is really becoming a huge issue now.
Oh yes, I think the one thing you won't, and I probably will touch on it, is consistency. It's all very well if you can pull out the worldies occasionally, and he wasn't pulled out worldies, but he was making decent saves. But if you don't stop the ones that you should stop, you shouldn't be right. I put it down to, and I'm very critical, as you probably know, of the Scottish national team. I think there's a difference between playing for Scotland and playing for England. The pressures of playing for England are the same as playing for Rangers. No matter how bad you are, people demand that you're going to go out and win the World Cup, the European nations, whatever. Scotland, I believe at this point, we're happy to be there, we've qualified. And I think Goram brought that to Ibrox. In fact, I remember, I think it was the programme around the Aberdeen game, where he says he gets bored and he's playing games of cricket in his mind when the ball's up the other end. Yeah. It's either Rangers news. And that shows his mentality. He thinks he's made it by being there, whereas all of us know your Rangers journey only starts when you pull on that jersey. Whatever you've done before, no matter how good it is, I think he takes a long time to adjust because he thinks he's made it. And things just start falling apart. He's too casual, he's unprofessional. And those first 3 months that is the worst Rangers goalkeeper I've seen. Number 1 goalkeeper I've seen in my life at this point in those first 3 months, because some of the mistakes are they're amateurish.
But we do get them back to Ibrox, Andy. John mentioned again the quality doesn't really ramp up. It's tense. I mean, there's a lot at stake of these early qualifiers, which they are now, I guess. First round, second round gets you into this new look group stage, and the next game is the final after that. Stuart McCall bundles home a kind of scrappy effort right after half-time at Ibrox, parity in the tie, and it's McCall again who, early in extra time, 93 minutes, puts Rangers into the lead overall, 2-0 on the night. Jock Brown makes the mistake of thinking it's Mo Johnson that scored. I don't think it's just because of the ginger hair. It's a Mo Johnson goal. It's very, very clever, great anticipation, great movement, great finish. But it's McCall. His top nearly gets ripped off him, I think, in the celebrations. So it's done, right? Until 5 minutes, when we have a bit of a disaster. Rangers, by the way, in this game are playing with a 5-man defence. Oleg Kuznetsov starting for the second time this season. His kind of comeback is underway. Walter's habit of tinkering with formation, trying new formations in huge European games that we've never used them before. We'll come back to this in a place not far from where John's sitting right now. I wouldn't have thought. But Kuznetsov's in there with John Brown, Scott Nisbet. Hasn't been used before. He uses it on that night. Meester's cross not stopped by Robertson. That's the first thing. And people forget Davy Robertson took a while as well to establish himself. It wasn't just Goram, although he was taking the headlines, obviously. Scott Nisbet did all he could to stop the Seagull being able to control and get a shot away. And I think he's done all right. And Goram just has to stop the ball as it bounced back to him. He writes later, through my hands and into the net it went, and we were out of Europe. Andy, were you there that night? And for all the issues with Goram, there's another game to come to that happened just before this one. It's getting hard to defend them at the moment.
This goal was disastrous, and if you go and watch it again on YouTube, it's you can't quite believe it's Andy Goram. Well, the Andy Goram we now know, because as you say, it's like Barcash. That's the way I would describe it.
Yeah,
He does that, like a pensioner getting tipped out of a wheelchair dive, and the ball goes through his hands. It's a disastrous goal. And when you then put it in the context of what it actually means in terms of getting into the Champions League, it's doubly disastrous. So, just a word on the formation. It's a bit of a trip to think back now that Walter Smith played that formation, the defensive formation, in such a game. My recollection, John, you can tell me if I've got this wrong, but my recollection was that Kuznetsov was getting brought back in, and it was pretty clear he wasn't fit. It was pretty clear he was a yard short of pace.
He played on the Saturday. He played on the Saturday against Aberdeen, another game that we'll come to, but in a fore, because Rangers are not going to sit with 5-3, call it what you like, at home, even to Aberdeen, who'd obviously caused all the problems the previous season. But you're probably right. He's not match fit. I mean, he's hardly kicked the ball since that horrendous injury. But it's the system. Systems are maybe more important than you can work with an individual coming back. They've got to come back at some point, and plenty of people have come back, off the bench even, or straight back into the team from nowhere and done the biz. But when you've just got three men in defence who never played together. Goff's missing at this moment; he's injured. And remember, Kuznetsov, it was always the plan to have him in a three. But
the bureau, wasn't it? That was the thing at the time.
But it just wasn't tried before this huge kind of do or die fixture. But as I said, it wouldn't be the last time we got to that. But you're right, Andy. The goal is it is calamity stuff.
Actually, that TV angle does it favours, because I was in the Govan, and maybe I'm wrong, but I actually see it, and he seems to make his hands into like a circle, and the ball goes through the circle as I'm watching it. I mean, it's one of those goals which you can see again, unfortunately, in your mind's eye, and it's in slow motion. And as Andy said, like the pensioner getting thrown out, you're just saying, pick it up, catch it, put it around the post. I mean, it just seems so obvious. I mean, as for the 5, I'm not sure. I think we were pretty confident getting into this. And we thought wrongly that we would beat this lot. And if we were going to a 5, how many games in Scotland can you really try it? And it doesn't make it right or whatever. But I think there was a degree of confidence, which obviously became overconfidence, we put out, and thought, right, we'll play this. And at this point, Nisbet's playing decent. He's scoring a few goals. He isn't playing bad. As you said, he makes a fair fist by trying to save it. Kuznetsov, does he ever look fit after his injury? He always seems to be, I don't know, half a yard slow or one step away from being back injured again. But this team we're playing aren't good. I know they do reasonably well in that sort of playoff, the round robin sort of league thing. they're a team we should have beat away, and we shouldn't even had to go to extra time, even get losing for this. We didn't play well in either leg. The back five wasn't great, but actually the front five weren't not much better, and the goalkeeper, as we said, couldn't keep wins out of close at this point.
I mean, give Prague their due. They knock out Marseille in the second round. Marseille have just been to the final. They're in the group, this newfangled group stage with Barcelona, whom, I mean, Barcelona get there relatively comfortably, but they beat them at home. So, you know, results would suggest they're maybe better than certainly we thought, than you thought at the time, but Rangers don't turn up. They don't turn up in either leg, and that's really the crucial point. Goram's hesitancy dealing with that own goal, as it would turn out, can probably be explained by the start of the season, but the midweek before that, Rangers tumbled out of the Skull League Cup at the semi-final stage, and it really is another Andy Goram disaster. It's Hampden against Hibs, his old team, of course. Rangers without Goff, as I said, injured, and quite incredibly, Mikhailchenko and Kuznetsov were in international duty that midweek. USSR were playing Hungary. Fixture schedules not being aligned in those days necessarily. Still should have been enough for Hibs, but we don't. Hibs were actually well worth their win, and their place in the final. This was just only one goal in it, completely unnecessary, completely needless. It was avoidable. Pat McGinley just punts the ball forward for Mark McGraw. He gets a reasonable amount of space in behind Brown, kind of in between David Robertson's coming back and Scott Nisbet, but the pace of Robertson ensured that he would have been close enough to put pressure on McGraw by the time he controlled the bouncing ball. But that's made academic by the fact that Goram decides to run to the edge of his penalty area, punch the ball out straight to Mickey Weir, who's got all the time in the world to place the ball right in the head of Keith Wright, unmarked between the stranded Goram, and you've got Scott Nisbet and Gary Stevens on the goal line, unable to do anything. It was a nice header, to be fair, but he's only 4 yards out from goal. And that was it. And he really did take this hard, even within the dressing room. Ian Ferguson said he was just completely felt he let the team down. He was miserable, and he left Hibs to win trophies, and they go and they beat Dunfermline in the final. And remarkable that in this game, and fast forward to May 1994, you've got two goalkeeping errors really between Rangers and a kind of treble. Both of you there at Hampden that night. Smith throws on all three of McCoy's, Johnson, Haitley. We'll come to that in a moment. It was McCoy that starts on the bench that night. There was some almost moments, some scrappy stuff around the Hibs penalty area in the second half, but I don't think Rangers really deserved to win that night. But again, it's Goram that dominates the headlines, Andy.
I wasn't there, but I remember the goal because with hindsight, he just doesn't get back on his line. He comes out and punches at the very, very edge of his box, which is something you don't see at all nowadays. But he comes right to the edge of his box, punches it falls to a Hibs player, and as you say, he's caught in no man's land, so it looks horrific. If he'd sprinted back to his line, and turned his back on play, he might have got there in time, but it's just one of the ones where he's just caught so far off his line. And, on the back of the Hearts game at Tynecastle, where the ball floats over his head into the goal, and there's an increasing body of evidence that Rangers fans at the best of times are quick to make a decision on players, as we know. But there was an increasing body of evidence that this guy wasn't going to do. He was making so many mistakes that sometimes gets to the stage when you're a Rangers player that there's a point of no return. And it's particularly acute if you're a goalkeeper, because a mistake is going to get punished. So you've got the goal at Tynecastle. In fact, I think there was 2 goals at Tynecastle.
No,
you've got this,
just the one,
and then you've got the cup tie, and then you've got the Champions League. So it cost us 2 competitions basically, and then at the start of the season wasn't exactly covered in glory. So as John says, you're looking at this and thinking, who has this guy signed? Because when we signed him, I think the consensus was it was a good move. He was Scottish. The three-4 rule was obviously coming into play. he was in the fringes. No, even the fringes, becoming a Scotland player. The first, second choice behind would have been Leighton, Brian Gunn, those kind of players at that time. So he had a pedigree, and he knew the Scottish game, and he knew he was a good goalkeeper within the Premier League. But he was falling to bits, and it was causing a problem for the whole team. And you're talking about the defence there and Goff's absence. I think that had a lot to do with it as well, because Goff would have been a calming influence and would have commanded that 6-yard box as well. But this was a big problem at that point in time, and I think if you'd asked people to put their bets on the table at that time, they would have said they wouldn't have been there at the end of the season.
John, we've talked about Goram. That's fine, and the lack of confidence there. Is there a lack of confidence about the manager? Again, the right immediate caretaker appointment, the ideal guy to bring in and just see that thing over the line. But we have this week, and Walter kind of has these moments, doesn't he? And we'll see throughout the rest of this series. The weeks from hell, we'll get one in 1994. But Sparta Prague on the Wednesday away. Again, Goram at fault for the only goal in a 1-0 defeat. Sorry, you got this cup semi-final. Sorry, in the Wednesday, you've got the Sparta Prague at Ibrox the following Wednesday, and then in the middle we lose 2-0 at home to Aberdeen in a kind of weird, flat, dejected performance. There's no Goram or major Goram issues. I don't think in that game. But as I said, I think last week, if there's pressure on Andy Goram, there's pressure on Walter Smith. You remember those early moments of the season thinking, this isn't ideal. But I guess a Rangers support very used to, with the exception of 88-89, not starting particularly quickly.
I don't recall it being pressure on Smith. And I think there should have been probably at that point, but I don't think there was, for two reasons, or maybe three. One was we'd won the league on such a high, which gets through the summer. Goram is literally so bad that, we didn't play well at Hampden, we didn't play well against Sparta Prague, but the fact is we wouldn't have lost any of them if the keeper wasn't, doing what he was not supposed to do. And Goff wasn't there, but we always cope with injuries. But the mistakes that Goram was making, even Goff being there, wouldn't have solved those issues, because it was amateur. He came for decision making wrong in that night. He came out for it. As Andy says, he's really slow. Well, he doesn't get back at all. He's kind of, a rabbit in the headlights. Like, it's not a strong punch, and we give it a kind of last hurrah or at the second half, but there's not really much belief about the team. But Walter has done something, and I think that game you described last week at Parkhead buys a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because not since the summer of '76 have we gone to Parkhead and strutted our stuff.
Yeah.
And enjoyed ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is that maybe it's not huge now, and it certainly wouldn't be huge 3-4 years later when we're so used to going there and beating them. But at this point, to go and beating them so comprehensively, and you also know you're going to win the league. There is nothing there. Goram actually, because of his clangers in the league, and we aren't covering all, or we might cover some of his later clangers in October, and as we go through. We would be well clear of the pack if he wasn't throwing in balls every other week. I can think that Scott Crabbe goal, Tynecastle, Falkirk, Dundee United. And this is a Rangers team that's scoring loads. But nobody's going to put a run together. We might be behind in the league, but everybody knows at this point we're going to get to about November, December, and the odds are we will rattle through quite a lot of wins, and everybody else will probably have 2 wins, 2 defeats, and a draw.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. After that,
we can walk our way to the next 4 titles, and in fact, we do to at least 2 of them.
Yeah, this is where I diverge a wee bit. We get there for sure, and I think this summer that's going to come in '92 is that point where I think everybody knows that it's over now for the foreseeable future. Rangers were at 340 on the last day of the season, second in the league, just gone. Rangers are not yet the favourites and the best team in the country and all of that, but that clear blue water where we really can just kind of sleepwalk. And as we're going to get to talk about, Rangers pretty much after this episode do the absolute opposite of sleepwalk. Rangers go into overdrive and don't really stop for the next 2 years, and then and only then can we just basically bumble our way through a season knowing that nobody can get close. It takes an effort, and it takes an incredible run of performances to get this back on the road. But you're right. I think the Parkhead game, maybe by Smith, and of course that title, but he said, he felt under huge pressure there because this is his team. He's not really just managing Graham's over the line. Huge changes this summer, and the pressure was on. One can only wonder what Souness would have done with Goram, because Souness wanted him, and this wasn't a kind of Walter Smith idea. What Souness would have done with that kind of start, whether he'd be looking to basically bring a new goalkeeper in from England immediately in September, October time. And this is maybe a sign of how different life's going to be with a new Rangers manager. Smith knows he can't solve Goram's problem. Smith is not a goalkeeper, never was a goalkeeper. He asked Goram, what can I do for you, son? I need consistency. And Goram asked him to bring in Alan Hodgkinson, and that's what he does. And eventually, it comes good. There would be more. John, you've mentioned that Rangers would draw 1-1 with Falkirk at home at the end of October. Goram's responsible for that. We would lose 3-2 up at Tannadice in the midweek at the end of October. Goram responsible for the winner, spilling it right to the feet of Duncan Ferguson, I think. And then the visit of Celtic on the first Saturday in November, and there is a mistake, but this time it's from a very trusted old pro, Nigel Spackman. He had few mistakes in him, but his terrible back pass let in Tony Cascarino for the Celtic equaliser. Nothing Goram could do about that, and in fact Goram was excellent that day, made a few brilliant saves, and that's probably the turning point, or the start anyway, of resurrecting this Rangers career, because Goram really, really was superb. It was McCoist who had given Rangers the lead in that Old Firm game. Clever run, low diving header, and that seemed unlikely, an Old Firm goal for Ali McCoist at the end of August. But by the time that November game came, it felt inevitable. This was his 10th goal in 7 games. We need to challenge something, because this all started way back in September when Rangers went to Tynecastle again, this time in the League Cup. This is what happened.
David Robertson will reach Hakeley. Oh, it's a lovely duck from McCoist. A terrific goal for Rangers. And McCoist is back with a bang.
Okay, Andy, I'll start with you. The narrative here, set by McCoist himself in his book of 1992, his first autobiography, is that basically on this quarter-final, September the 4th, Walter brings him back into the team. He scores that brilliant goal, he celebrates the way he celebrates, and the rest is history. It is him and Hakeley forevermore. That's not strictly true. The game at Tynecastle, Walter Smith does what Graham Souness has done early, or just basically a year ago when Rangers went to Tynecastle in the league. He plays all three. Johnson, Hakeley and McCoist start. And the goal comes from a Hakeley knockdown. And it's Hearts' defence getting pulled in all directions again, and it happened a year ago as well. Graham Hogg has to come out to deal with Hakeley. Craig Levine's occupied by Johnson, which left John Miller completely out of position and left kind of helpless to block McCoyst's shot. So that's one thing. It wasn't Smith saying, right, you and Hakeley, those are my guys. It was a combination of three. Ali gets stretchered off in the Czech Republic, or what becomes the Czech Republic, then still Czechoslovakia, against Prague. He doesn't start the Hibs game at Hampden. He doesn't start the Aberdeen game at Ibrox. It's Johnson and Hakeley again. And then throughout October, Smith mixes and matches. There's a bit of injury here, a bit of form there with Haitley, Johnson. Sometimes John Spencer started with McCoist. McCoist, though, in October starts them all. So Smith has said, no, it's going to be you, but I'm still trying to find my winning formula here. So the idea that it's him and Haitley from that day forward, the idea that McCoist was never out the team from that day forward isn't true. But by October, it's clear that McCoist is there, and he is doing the business. It really is incredible. He scores. Rangers beat Hibs at Ibrox 4-2, and McCoist scores an absolutely brilliant goal. And the difference in that, his goal, his celebration, Archie Knox is basically on the pitch hugging him. Compare that with that goal he scored against Aberdeen a year before, when Souness, by his own admission, could barely move a muscle in the stand. The Rangers are piling in the goals, right? This tricky start to the season is Goff's injury, it's Goram's form, Robertson's form perhaps, but Rangers are scoring loads. We scored 16 goals in the league in October, and some of the football's really starting to look impressive. Mikhailichenko is starting to get running in a Rangers team. Maybe running's the wrong word, but even against Aberdeen he was a kind of standout. Just for a wee bit of stats, 88, 89, 90, 91, Rangers averaged 1.72 goals per league game. That fell to 1.33 in that McCoist-Johnson season of 89-90. By November 91, the average is almost at 2.5. It's 2.48. So Smith has unlocked something here that really is quite incredible at the back end. But there's a lot going on with this, McCoist changing history thing. It wasn't quite as clear as that.
I think it probably points towards McCoist's recollection in terms of confidence.
Yeah.
In his head, I think he knew at that point it was there for him.
Yeah.
It was there for the taking. Because the way you characterised it there, Martyn, is the way I remembered it, that you had the three, Haitley, Johnson, McCoist, kind of jockeying for these positions. I always felt Haitley was the one that was the mainstay because of his style of play.
Yeah.
And it was because of injury. And wee knocks, no major injury, but wee knocks and things that kept players out for 2-3 games, that there was the opportunity to mix and match, or the necessity to mix and match. But it was kind of like he was making this, the old adage, be so good they can't ignore you. That was kind of where McCoist was going, because his all-round play was improving. As I recall, he was becoming more a rounded player outside the box, which was something that was probably levelled at him before, and that he was just a penalty box player. He was becoming far more progressive, deeper in the park, and the link-up play with Haitley and with midfielders was reminiscent of the kind of thing Johnson would do, was known for.
Mm-hmm.
And the goals, as you say, was because we had a team that had a lot of goals in it. You mentioned Mikhailichenko. He took a wee bit of time to warm up. I remember the game against Hearts when he first scored, and I think that was a kind of watershed for him, because he was getting in and around the box and doing the late Brian Robson runs as he was supposed to be famed for. And then you had the likes of Hoostra would chip in. We'll talk about Dale Gordon later on. He could score goals. So there was a lot of goals in the team, and he even had defenders that could chip in for set pieces and headers, and John Brown and Goff. And we spoke about McCall. No prolific, but they could chip in when required. So the team is evolving. But the most interesting thing, as you say, was the jockeying for two up front. I can't remember what you're talking about there in terms of having the three in that Hearts game. That's something that's passed me by completely. I cannot remember that. And I would have been interested to see that, because so was it, just to pick your brains there, man, was one of them playing deeper than the other, or was it just deeper. A case of front three?
McCoist was a wee bit deeper. Now McCoist, as John, I'm sure, will attest, played in midfield early in his...
That's what we signed him.
He
was an attacking midfielder.
Yeah. So, and the reason I mentioned, because it's obviously that kind of time of year, early September at Tynecastle, but in the previous season, Rangers beat Hearts 3-1, I think, at Tynecastle, early August, or late August, early in the season, and Souness goes with a 3, and they are pulling Hearts all over the place. And it kind of works. It looks good, but Souness, it's 4-4-2, and it's the big man and a kind of technical player beside him. And yet again, another example of seeing something right in front of you, but not pushing, and just kind of going with it, because they did look Maybe it was just Hearts. Maybe just Hearts couldn't deal with a 3-man attack. I don't know. It's just weird that it was Tynecastle that it gets kind of used, because the movement's superb. Watch the goal. It's a great strike. It's a great McCoy strike, but it's all Haitley and Johnson, and the Hearts just can't cope. The defence, they don't know who they're supposed to be picking up. So who knows? Who knows if either manager had maybe given that a wee whirl. But it would mean 3 Rangers players staying fit for more than a few weeks, which we kind of know isn't the case. But John, although Smith takes a while to kind of land on Haitley McCoist, he does have trust in McCoist, and he has that wee injury setback after that Hearts game. But as is borne out by October, he starts in every game and he scores 2, 3, 5, 7, 9 goals himself in the league in October. He's grabbing this opportunity because I guess he's got trust and confidence that the manager actually does back him.
Yeah, I think McCoy's was always a guy that needed a challenge in some ways. You know, that sort of carrot and stick. He did need to be loved, but I think there was also that devilment in him all through his Rangers career where, you know, you can't do this, well, I'll show you. And yeah, whereas Johnson I always felt was somebody who, once he'd done the challenge,
what's next?
Wasn't good. What's next? Precisely that, and he was a great player. What is fascinating is why, given also the 3 foreigner rule, why we weren't experimenting with these 3 strikers, because there's plenty of Scottish games you could have done it with Haitley, Johnson, and McCoist lying slightly deeper, because McCoist could play there. And Hearts weren't the worst defence in the league. Probably they were one of the best. Well,
given what they're going to do, I mean, we'll talk a wee bit about Hearts, I think, next week. By the time February comes, you know, they're the challenge, and the challenge is based on that miserly defence.
Yeah. And we've got these 2 seasons in a row. I mean, I remember vividly that night. I think it was one of the few nights, actually, it wasn't raining, at Tynecastle. And it was stunning. And I was working through there, and I think the girl that worked for me was a Hearts fan. She was going to stab me the next day because I'd prophesied what was going to happen. And no, we played really well, but that wasn't really, as you say, it's October when McCoist hits gear, and it's that Airdrie game, which is the first, I think, game in October, and he scores twice, and he seems to score twice. And it's not McCoist and Haitley in that first game. It's McCoist and Johnson.
Yeah.
Did Haitley have a knock or something?
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Throughout. Haitley doesn't score in October. He does play, but as I said, for the 5 games in a row in October, Smith doesn't name the same 2 in succession.
But McCoist is scoring.
But McCoist is in all of them. Yeah.
From everywhere and anywhere almost. I mean, if only he'd started 2 weeks before, you know, for Cup semi-finals and Europe, it would have helped. But no, he's flying at this bit, and I think that's the other thing where Smith might be feeling pressure, but it's typical Smith. It always seems he has these 7-10 days of absolute horror shows. Probably that was 14 from the Prague game to the last Prague game, and then just when the pressure is about to get ramped up, suddenly we get a run of results, you know, a run of performances that makes you think, well, okay, because we are a pleasure to watch. And it's not that we weren't a pleasure to watch the previous season, but we were pretty turgid from about February through until the last game of the season.
Yeah.
So, you know, Rangers fans' memories is always brilliant. So you're going from that, and then you've went through August, and okay, you know, you've won at Parkhead. September's a bit of a nightmare, but October is...
Goals galore, isn't it?
Yeah, goals galore. I mean, the weird thing, though, is that you forget how the stadium has changed. But, I mean, the average crowd around this point at home is 35,000, 36,000 because the capacity is, 42, 43?
Yeah.
You're looking at it and going, where's all the fans got? But we are a pleasure to watch. And it's Haitley and McCoist and it's Johnson. But you do have really good players there. You have Huster's in good form, Mikhailichenko's in good form, Nisbet's scoring a few goals from the back. It's not that... it's one of those times. Is it a little bit like Gia towards the end of the season where things begin to click and they're in a little bubble?
Well, it's why I titled this chapter in the book by this set of 4 Alchemy, because Smith he discovers it, he creates it, he stumbles across it. I don't know, or we'll talk about how it kind of comes to life, but it will come to life, and that's really by the end of October, start of November, that Smith has made that decision. Mo Johnston saved Goram's blushes in that Falkirk game. He scored for Rangers to at least get a point. That was the last game he started, the last game he scored. He was dropped for the trip to Tannadice, and he'd be on the bench for the next few weeks. And well, Alan McCoist was, I guess, willing to endure that pain and be patient, because he's this deep-rooted love for the club. Johnson was absolutely not a restless professional, I think it's probably fair to say. He made it known that if he wasn't going to start for Rangers, he would prefer to start for someone else, and he wanted to go. It's actually Stuart McCall that pushed him in the direction of Everton. Everton and Leeds wanted him, and McCall said, for someone who quite likes a good work-life balance, shall we say, that Howard Kendall might be a better bet than Howard Wilkinson. And he performed fairly well for Everton, scored once in every 3, again playing in a 3-man attack with Tony Cottee and Peter Beardsley. But this kind of prolific nature of Johnston's game probably was out by that point. He was maybe more of an all-round forward, scorer of big goals rather than hatfuls. And his career kind of fizzled out from 92-93 onwards. Some might say he missed out on another league medal by not going to Leeds. I'm not sure if that would have turned out that way, because Leeds missed out on Johnson, but they went for a French player called Eric Cantona, and that worked out all right for them that season. Both of you, I really want your opinions on this 2 and a bit years of Maurice Johnson. One thing to sign for Rangers, but it's another thing for him to actually go and play and do the biz, and quite a subdued, quiet departure for someone who'd made such a sensational entrance. Andy, the common consensus is great season, alright season, poor half season. I don't really buy that. I think for those first 2 seasons, Mo Johnston was very good for Rangers. He popped up now and again in this kind of intermittent and troubled first few months of this season. I think that's probably a fair assumption. What's your summary of Johnston's time?
I think he did the job he was brought to do. If you just look at it purely footballing wise, then you're correct. It was one really good season, one good season, and then the third half season was kind of hit and miss for the reason we've spoken about in terms of the striking department. He did leave with a whimper, and it's as if it burnt out. It was such a seismic signing, and there was such fervour around the fact that he'd signed for Rangers that he was never ever going to be here for the long term. He was never going to get a testimonial. It was never going to be one of their relationships. And it was whether you've just compared McCoist versus Johnson in terms of the inner desire, the motivations that actually lie with the heart, and that's probably a good summation of the difference between the two. Mo Johnston was a professional first and foremost, dare I say a mercenary. I think there's any doubt about it. Whereas McCoist, there was something else there, as well as being a good professional. So when he left, I can't remember there being any dissent whatsoever. He kind of went with our best wishes. The folk that had laboured under his signing were then, I don't think they were triumphant or anything, as if good riddance. But there was none of that, as I can recall. And if there was, it was probably more said in private than in public. But we didn't live in a social media age back then. It was a kind of low-key departure, but there was certainly from my circles, there was a acknowledgement he did the job that he came to do, and probably the bigger contribution was what it opened up in terms of Rangers Football Club, and the barriers it broke down, and the kind of way it changed everything.
John, Matt, I'll ask you the same questions, Andy, in a minute, just in terms of how you would assess his overall performance, but I think one of the myths that the Johnson time here, rather than just the signing, exploded, was probably by the 80s one of the probably the biggest myth that propelled the inverted commas, signing policy, signing practice, call it what you wish, which was, all right, we can sign a Roman Catholic if we want, and he can wear a Rangers jersey, but is he really going to want to play? Is he really going to bust a gut? Is he really going to go to the nth degree, right to the wall for Rangers? Is he going to die and bleed blue for the cause? No. So what's the point? What is the point? Is it will cause issues in the dressing room, etc., etc., etc. Johnson did explode that because, especially for that first season, I would argue the first two, he was as committed as any Rangers player out in the park. And I think I still think what that signing and what that time that he served with Rangers represented was more about the modern than the past. It was more about what the new professional footballer looked like than religion, really. And it was that if a professional is induced enough by money and the chance to win things, he will bust the gut for anybody. Because as we mentioned before, the easiest decision in the world for Johnson to make was to go home, as it were. But he saw something professionally more attractive, and he went for it. And that was shattered then. This idea that you needed to have grown up hearing tales about Struth and Waddle in order to play for Rangers. That's really what it shattered. Not necessarily about the simple superficial elements of another Roman Catholic coming in later on. It was, if you offer someone money and they're good enough, they're going to come and do a professional job, which is what he did for a time period and then left very much as soon as signing, really, because there's loads like that.
Yeah, I think it was, let's be honest, in terms of the money aspect, that was sharp with Terry Butcher. I mean, he came for money, no other reason, you would argue. But he gave everything for the cause.
And Roberts.
So all the English players come in, you can't say. I think the question mark I had, and certainly a lot of the guys around there, was, could someone from that background come and be as professional or as committed as these English players were? And that was the question mark, because we've seen quite a number, even in discussions, of players who Souness wanted but didn't want to come, a lot of it for family reasons. And he went, to be fair, I don't think at any point Johnson ever let us down. I thought he was always committed to the cause. I think you could say his first season was exceptional. I think he was still great the second season and into the third. I think the thing that was dissipating was he was bored. What next? He took on challenges. If he wanted the easy life or to play for Raselic, he would have went back there. He would never have left to go to Nantes. He was an ambitious young guy, and we were an ambitious club, and it was a perfect fit. And nobody could criticise him for not giving everything that he had, because he fought his way, he made it happen, and he was a fantastic. In terms of him going quietly, unfortunately by that point, I mean, this is a year in which we've seen Butcher go, Woods go, and we're getting kind of used to Walters go.
Yeah, Stephen.
Unfortunately, we're getting used to seeing heroes going and not really saying cheerio to them, because Butcher disappears. Woods, there might be rumours, but I don't think it was ever, that's his last game before that Aberdeen game. I think everybody maybe thought Walters, Souness was going to sign him.
Yeah.
But there wasn't, did any of them apart from Ray Wilkins really get a really send-off at Ibrox? I don't believe so. It was the way of the world. They come in, they do the job, and they go. It was all very professional.
Clinical. Just
clinical,
and out,
professional and work ethic and all of this. It was like, you come in, you do the job, you get paid, you get well rewarded, and then we'll fire you. It's hire and fire or whatever. Sounds a bit callous, but it is that kind of thing. And Johnson did it perfectly, and I think that was a surprise. I think what he shattered wasn't that players could come in, because I think Butcher shattered that. I think what he shattered was there is someone like himself, like Neil McCann, who can come from supporting Celtic. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. From a real strong background, and then say, actually, I'll play for it, which up until that point was something that Rangers supporters could go and play for Celtic and would give everything. Up until Johnson signs, no Celtic supporter plays for us and gives everything. And that's what changed. And that opened up. But there haven't been too many. Scots we've signed. But, him, Neil McCann, they shatter that sort of illusion that they don't want to play for us. And they came, but I think for Johnson being the first, I'm not sure they came if he was the second or third. I think it was the appeal of being the first, having that challenge, that pressure, and that's what he thrived.
I think that would have definitely, there would have been some spice in that for sure. But I go back to what I said at the start and what we said in those shows around his signing. The package worked, whether he was the first, the third, or the fifth. The package worked. More money and a genuine chance to win medals that he was not going to get with the club who wanted him first. And as cool and as cold as that's how it happened. But what it did do is obviously resolve that issue, that striking issue that had caused so much tension in the previous season, and there was maybe an air of calm about Ibrox after that, because it was now McCoist and Haitley, and that was that. Smith, this is a bit of a coda really. Up at St Johnstone, 12th of September, around the time that things aren't quite knitting together. Rangers win 3-2. It needs a very late Scott Nisbet goal to secure the points. But Smith and Alex Totten, manager St Johnstone at the time, fireworks on the touchline, both charged with breach of the peace. Very un-Walter-like, Andy, but again, go back to that question I asked John a while ago. How much pressure was he really under in this early stage where signings are not bedding in and things aren't quite going to plan? Graham Souness you could absolutely see being charged with breach of the peace on a touchline, but maybe not Smith.
Yeah, it was probably something we hadn't seen from him in public before. I mean, we got to know Walter very, very well, obviously, and we've seen something similar years later with Pat Linen, I think it was. But at this point in time, I don't think we had seen, as a Rangers support, we'd seen Walter's teeth. Because I think at that time, players would talk about him and how he behaved around the dressing room, and that he was quite a fearsome character at times, and the response would be, really because he was very, very, measured in how he dealt with the media, and we never ever really thought of him as the teacup throwing Souness type. We always thought of him as the offset to that, and that's why he was in the dressing room. But there was that side to him, and that incident with Totten, I can't remember the details around it, but Totten was a peer of Walter Smith at that time.
Yeah, for sure. And
it probably does point to the pressure, because the Sparta Prague thing was a financial blow, just as it is nowadays. If we weren't to qualify for European group stages, whether it's Europa or Champions League, it was a big financial blow at the time, and something flies about in my mind that it was worth 4 or 5 million quid to the club at that point, and our turnover would have been, I don't know, Martyn, about 12 million at that time.
Yeah, 11, I think.
Yeah. So it was a hell of a dough, hell of a chunk of change for us to lose out on, particularly when we're expanding the club deck, and we've got grand ambitions for the domestic squad. But that was the beginning of Walter, and I always thought that at that point, as you said earlier on, the league was going to come our way. It was just a matter of time. We'd wear them down because we had a better squad with more resources. It was not quite a matter of time, but there was always that relaxation when you put your head in a pillow at night. You knew that things would really have to go against us for us not to win the league over the course of whatever it was, 44 game league at that point, wasn't it?
44 game league. This was brought in this season. Just incredible. We'll touch on league reconstruction, I think, at a later date, because it is becoming a bit of a topic in Scottish football. It's just an absolute marathon. So Hearts are the surprise leaders. Rangers are staying in touch, especially now that things have settled. We got a kind of freak 1-0 defeat at home to St Mirren, but apart from that, loads more consistency, continuity, performance, team lineups and results. I guess there's an easy and very appealing straight line here to draw between Johnson leaving, maybe a settling effect because you don't have this conundrum anymore, and all of a sudden Rangers go in this great run from kind of November on. I think that would ignore the impact of another signing, and that being Dale Gordon from Norwich City that Smith brings in early November. 1.2 million. Should be noted, by the way, Johnson was sold for 1.5. Rangers made money on it. Rangers made money on transfers in those days, even the big ones that we kind of brought in. A replacement for Trevor Steven really on the right hand side. Never really got that done in the summer. The Trevor Steven deal was quite late. In fact, Trevor Steven scored at the start of this season. That's how late it was. Gordon's debut was at East End Park. Dunfermline scores twice. Rangers win 5-0, and just again a bit more balance, creativity coming from both sides. And as much as McCoist and Haitley, John, are going to fill their boots, and they're famous for filling their boots, Rangers fans, we have to give a wee bit of credit to the providers. Gordon would make a difference there. Mikhailichenko absolutely has made a difference. That audacious halfway line lob or chip, I guess it should be at Brockville in one of his first games back in September. An early insight and the difference, the kind of different player that we got there. And also Peter Hooster's having a fantastic season. He gets called up for the Netherlands around this time. So there's a lot of supply, and you get two players up front, I guess, who are absolutely going to feed off that. But Dale Gordon, yet again, this is Smith, I think, copying the soonest market game plan. Go down to England, get someone in. It's getting to that stage of the season. We need a tonic, and Smith would do this a lot. And guys would just come in and do the job. And Gordon did. Quite an underrated spell at Rangers, I think.
Yeah, he came in and he hit the ground running, which always helps. But he was coming in. He came in at the right time, because this was off the back of October when we're scoring goals freely, and generally our better performance seemed to be away from home. It seems that way. I need to look back at all the things, but we're scoring a fair few goals away from home. You know, even getting beat at Tannadice, we scored twice. And we go East End Park and we just run over the top of them. And Dale Gordon looks good on that right hand side, which is, you know, a bit like a current Rangers team, you might argue, in 2022, where, you know, who's going to fill the right thing. And he's not really, he's got a bit of pace, but he's not a flying machine. He's not like Schuster from recollection. Yeah, he is actually very like Steven, not as good. He's not on that level. But
more of a work week, he put a shift in.
I mean, he would be a fantastic guy nowadays for Europe. A better player than Daniel Candeias, but a similar kind of thing.
Yes, he is better. A better Daniel Candeias.
But that kind of guy who would come in, he'd do a lot of work for the team. You know, up and down the side, cover, a lot unspoken. You look at, we will be looking at as we go through, or you will be, depending who it is, over the next season or so. There's some real crucial games where he's playing and doing a shift when it's backs to the wall, as well as creating a lot. And he was a good signing, because he came from nowhere, and we all kind of watched the English League, whatever it was at that point. It wasn't a Premiership yet, was it? Whatever, down at Ayrshire on a Sunday afternoon to watch Ulster TV or Border TV, etc. But I mean, he wasn't somebody that you would have said, "Oh, we should sign him," in a way that Stuart McCall rolled off the tongue because you'd seen him with Everton Cup final. Dale Gordon kind of came from nowhere. And yeah, he hit the ground running. He fitted straight into that whole system that we had. And you can't describe, the guy's got Gary Stevens at his back.
Yeah.
I mean, you do have a bit of license. You know, by this point, you know, Davy Robertson's got maybe the harder job because Miko was, you know, never the most industrious at this point in the left. But I mean, we are looking good in the flanks. the forwards just can't stop scoring between Haley and McCoist. And, Dale Gordon comes in and bags a couple of decent goals. It's a really good performance at East End Park. You're winning 5-0 away. And we are playing good football. Before he comes in, even that October, it turned the corner. But he brings that little bit more. And actually, our position at this point, it'd be fascinating to see where we are in every other season. It's probably one of the best we've been in at this time of the season as we head into the dark winter.
Well, 23rd of November is that St Mirren defeat, and it was a freak defeat, and it was very much an outlier in that run post the Celtic draw. But we were 3 points behind Hearts, 2 points for a win at the time on the 23rd of November. And that's where we'll stop tonight, I think, because we have that winter to come next week. Thank you, John.
No, thank you. Thank you, Andy, as well. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Andrew.
No worries at all. I'm glad Andy Goram's getting a wee bit better as we go along. Wonder where he'll end up.
Wonder where he'll end up, indeed. A wee bit of housekeeping. We're nearly at the halfway point of this epic journey through the Souness and Smith era, and I am always keen to read the comments on the thread. There's always quite a fair bit of discussion, some really good points being made. I'm grateful for anyone who really interacts with the show, whether it's just re-jogging memories or what I hope it does is create a bit of debate about why things happened the way they did and what could have happened differently, because that's really what history's about. Given that, and given it's the summer, I'd be interested if anyone is up for a kind of live show over Zoom where you can tease out some of those theories, bit of a Q&A with definitely myself. If I can persuade John and Andy to join, that'd be lovely. But if you're interested, let us know on the thread. We'll maybe do that in a few weeks as we reach that halfway point. But thanks, gents. Thanks, listeners. We'll be back next week. From Dale Gordon to Eric Bo Anderson, Walter Smith was doing something that he would do for quite a while, which is reaching out to the quality reinforcements in ways that no others really in Scotland were able to do. As much as the transformation from Souness to Smith would develop, some things were remaining the same. As had been the case before, as soon as Christmas came into view, Rangers would go into overdrive. Until next week, bye for now.